All right, so several months ago, I wandered into Costco with Diane, and they had what they call this pavilion shade structure on sale. They're really designed to put in your backyard, put your patio furniture under, or your picnic table, whatever you have, and help keep you out of the sun. But we thought they'd be perfect to use as a carport for both the Toyota pickup and our Lexus SUV. So we bought two of them. Now I went ahead and put one of them together, obviously here. That way I'd familiarize myself with it. And the second one here, I'm not going to give step-by-step instructions because you got the manual for that. But as I go along, I'm going to do it and kind of run the video in a time lapse, but I'll stop it once in a while and give you tips along the way. Now I've been a builder for 40 years, and I did the whole thing myself, even the roof. So when I did the roof, I had to go off the directions a little bit because Costco has you build it on the ground and put it up there afterward. It takes several people for that, and I did it all alone. So that involves a bit of ladder work, and it's not the safest thing in the world, so I'll make sure and make a note of what's a little less safe for people who are maybe not so comfortable on ladders. But in the meantime, the first thing I got to do is, over there is all the parts. I want to take them out here, unbox it, lay it all out here so I can see where they are. Makes it very quick and easy for me to pull them out and put this thing together. I set a couple sawhorses up here because that'll really help me with the assembly of the legs and other parts. That way I don't have to bend over. I'm not trying to work on the ground. Unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of a nice flat concrete surface, so these will help me out. Now, it is a relatively soft material that the pavilion's made of. It's a cedar, which is kind of a soft wood. I put a little padding here on top of the sawhorses so I don't scratch them up. So the first thing to think about is when you're getting out these posts, there are a couple pieces that are stored inside the post for shipping. Now, just in case these should get hung up in there, I want you to pay attention, look inside the post, make sure they're not there, because you're not going to need these till you get to the roof. And by then the posts are going to be standing up, and you're going to have to try and figure it out. So be sure to take all of these out of each of the four posts. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and attached these metal brackets here. Just go ahead and do it as per directions. But one tip I have is when you're tightening the bolts in there, tighten them so that the T-nut just pulls flush with the surface of the wood here. That way when you put on what they call the plinth, this bottom trim, it'll sit nice and flush against the wood there. So the way I do this, what worked better for me on the other one was putting on the long sides first, because you can push them tight against this metal bracket, and you can go back over here and you can kind of feel when they're centered on there. And then you just go ahead and put them on with these wood screws. Also, it's a fairly soft material and all the holes are pre-drilled, so it's very easy when you're using a driver to pull that screw deep into the wood here, and it really doesn't look good. So what you want to do is just be a little careful, drive the screws just so the head is flush with the wood. It'll just look a lot more professional and a lot cleaner that way. Now when you're doing this, just do your best. All the pieces are not going to fit exactly perfectly necessarily, because this is wood, and wood is kind of a dynamic material. It shrinks and swells a little bit, so depending on the humidity, just exactly how dry it was when it was milled. But if you just do your best here, once you get it all together, it'll all look fine. So here we are, the posts are all assembled, and we're ready for the next step. All right, new day. Today I'm going to start on the gable beam and the side beam assemblies. The most important thing on this is to keep them very straight. You want to assemble them so they're very straight in both directions. So now what I found, the best way to keep this straight when you're doing the side beam assemblies is to kind of put all the bolts in loosely and then align the pieces as you go. There's 3 pieces on one side, 2 on the other. Another thing you want to make sure of is you want to make sure these ends are as even as possible. And when it's laying there loosely, you can tap them, and it may not be perfect, but you can certainly get it close. All right, I've got everything laid out here. I have the gable beams on the gable ends. I've got the side beams on the side ends. In each corner, I have a 12 by 12 inch stepping stone, and that's what the posts are going to rest on. Now, when I put this one up, I didn't have the luxury of having a post right here, so what I did was I screwed a board to the fence there and used that to brace the first post. But in this case, it's quite a bit easier. I can just clamp these 2x4s, a 2x4 onto each of these posts, and also onto the post I'm going to set up. That will make this part of the assembly a lot easier for me. Now when you're putting on the beams, when you're doing the side beams, you want to have the bolts facing to the outside. These 2 holes go down. The reason you want that is the brace will support this joint here on the inside of the structure. Okay, so now all the beams are level and all the posts are plumb. The next step is to square the structure. Now, according to the directions, it's 14 foot 11 inches from the inside of this post to that post, and the same on the other side. So since I'm alone, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a small nail and drive it into the top of the post about 1 inch diagonally back from the corner here. Now, it doesn't matter how far you go, you just have to do the same on both of them. That way I can hook my tape measure on that and measure back to the corner. Now, the exact dimension doesn't really matter. What's most important is that both measurements are exactly the same. everything is, the beams are level, posts are plumb, braces are in, and it's squared up. Time for the next step. So here's one little tip. When I sight down this piece, there's a little bit of side curve to it. And I notice over here, my gable beam has a slight bit of a curve too, just from natural wood warping of the wood. So what I do is I'll put this on there with the curves opposite each other, and it should straighten itself out. Now the directions call for this piece to be in 17 inches from the post, but what I did was I put a mark 17 inches at each end because it's not an exact measurement. And then I'll center this piece between those two marks. So what I've done is I've taken one of these boards and clamped it to the outside of each of these two roof supports. What that does is that creates like a little saddle that rafter will sit in. That way when I'm assembling the roof, I don't have to worry about it slipping off one edge or another. So the way I'm going to do this step with the ridge is I'm going to take one of the rafter braces, the one that spans the joint here between the long and the short ridge pieces. I'm going to go ahead and line up the bolt holes really carefully. And then I'll screw that on there. And that will make the ridge all one piece. And as before with the beams, I want to slide along it to make sure it's as straight as I can possibly get it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this board and clamp it to the underside of the rafter. I'm using kind of a wide board because I want it to come inside the building some so that I don't risk having that ridge fall off. And this is just to temporarily support this end of the ridge while I screw that end of the ridge into the rafter. Now everything I'm doing here, starting from when I put those rafters on, is where I have to vary from the instructions. Since I'm doing it all myself, I won't be able to build the entire roof on the ground and lift it up. So this is where I want you to just be a little bit careful. It involves a lot of ladder work. If you're not comfortable on a ladder, you shouldn't try this. I'll just continue carrying the rafters up one by one, centering them on the pre-drilled holes, screwing each one on until I get to the other side. And that's half the rafters up. Now the ridge is probably going to sag a little bit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a 2x4, I'll prop it up so it's nice and straight. half of the roof together. I was able to put it up exactly in place because I had plenty of room to work all the way around it. But now for the second side here, I can't really put it up in place because the ridges are tight together and I won't be able to get in to drive the screws through the back of the ridge into the rafters, or I will not be able to get up there to put the screws in the roof panels. So what I'm going to do is on the end rafters, I'm going to go ahead and set them in place, but slide them down a little lower to where they're just even with the back side of this gable rafter support. Then I'll put the ridge on between the two, and that'll give me room to work in between. Once it's all assembled, I should be able to slide it right up and then fasten the two together. Now, in order to support this end of the ridge, while I screw that end on, I'm going to take this piece of wood, clamp it on here, sticking out a ways, approximately at the bottom of the rafter. It doesn't have to be exact. Ideally, you want to be just a little lower than it so you can lift the ridge up and put it right in place. This will support the end of the ridge. I've also taken this temporary support that I had on the first roof, moved it over to the second ridge. The first roof will be fine on its own. I really just need it while I'm working on it, because while I'm up there I may be putting some downward pressure, and this will keep it in place. Thing to note that at this point I'm following the directions. I'm just doing it up in the air instead of on the ground. So you can go with the directions that are in the manual. Just keep in mind you'll be working off a ladder. You will not be working on the ground. Purlins on. That's what these pieces that run perpendicular to the rafters are called. The next step is to square up this roof section here. The way to do that is you measure diagonally from corner to corner, then diagonally the other way from corner to corner. You want those measurements to be exactly the same. It doesn't matter what the number is, they just need to be exactly the same. Now in the event that it's not square, and it doesn't seem likely that it will be the first try, I'll use this ratchet strap that I have as a tie down for lumber and such in my pickup truck, and I'll run it diagonally in whichever direction I need to, and slowly crank it until I have the measurements exactly the same. Now once I have that exactly the same, meaning the roof will be square, the directions call for the metal roof panels to stick down 5/16 of an inch below the bottom edge. What I've done is I've taken this 2x4 and I've cut a rabbet, which is a notch along one edge of it, in actually a little more than 5/16, because I found on the first one that that wasn't quite enough. So what I'll do is I'll clamp one of these at each end, and wherever a joint from the two panels is, that way I can lay out all my roof panels, because I do like to lay them all before I put it in one screw. When I have them all laid out there, make sure that they are fitting properly. And then I'll screw those down, then I can take these off. Now in this case I was really lucky. When I pulled my measurement, tape measure, both measurements were exactly the same. It was 14 feet and 1/4 inch. Don't worry if your measurement doesn't come out like that. Like I said, the most important thing is that both measurements are exactly the same. Because even though those measurements are the same, as much as I love wood, I've made a living with it all my life, it's not a perfect material. So it could be a little bent and warped, and everything may not be perfectly straight. So you might still see me get out the ratchet strap and pull things one way or another. I won't find out until I get up there and start doing it all together. So what I've done is, I took this roof panel and slid it up until the two ridges were tight together. I used a couple of clamps to bring the ridges in perfect alignment. Then I put in the whole row of bolts there, tightened them down nice and tight, and slid the final ridge cap on top of it. Now once the roof panel is in place, don't worry if everything's not sitting down exactly where it should be. What you probably need to do is, what I'm going to do next is adjust the position of these gable support beams. What you want to make sure is that what we call the bird's mouth, this little notch cut out of the rafters, is nice and tight against the beams. So we're starting to look pretty good here. There's just 2 more steps before it's totally finished. The next step I've got to do is put the fascia board on, and after that we'll assemble and install the trusses inside. Now, according to the directions, they want the bottom edge of the fascia board to be 1 inch below the bottom edge of the outside rafters. So now when I'm doing that alone, and even if you have some help, I found the easy way to do that is I measure up from the bottom of the rafter on the side that'll be facing to the inside of the building, and I put a little line at 1 inch. That's the 1 inch that the directions require. I do it up near the top, and I do it very near the bottom so that you don't interfere with your beams here. And then what I'll do is I'll just drive an 8-penny nail just a little ways, barely a ½ inch into the board. And then once I get outside there, I'll be able to push that nail up against the bottom of the rafter, and that'll automatically keep me in place. Now when you pull the nails, there will be a tiny hole there, but it's going to be way up, right where the 2 pieces of wood meet, so that's not, nobody's ever going to see it. It's just not going to be an issue. All right, so here we have 2 Costco pavilions, carports to me, built completely by myself. Now on the first one here, you're just going to have to take my word for it. On the second one, you saw me go through all the steps. You didn't see anybody else there. In fact, I was really careful not to let anybody help at all. Not with unpacking 1 piece of lumber, not with opening the cardboard. I even threw all the trash away myself. I wanted to be able to honestly say that I built it completely alone. Now, I'm not trying to encourage anybody to do this. I really just wanted to show what's possible. Now again, a lot of the ladder work you saw me do was very dangerous, and I want you to be really careful with that. Don't pay attention to what I did and stay within the safety guidelines. I did everything wrong. I stood all the way on top of the ladder. I was overreaching way off the side. I had it set up in the gravel, but again, I know where my limits are, and I never push them. I always stay within them. Everybody's limits are in a different level, and you've got to stay within your limits. And also, I've been wearing sandals through the whole thing. I'm sure you noticed that too. Really don't encourage wearing sandals. You're a lot better off with some kind of a safer footwear than that. It's just something I always do when I'm working around the house. I wear my work boots all week long. Very happy to get in sandals, especially in the summertime. Now you saw from the way the sweat was soaking through my shirt on most of the video that it was pretty hot while I was doing this. Here in Northern California foothills, we had some pretty warm days while I was building this, and I really drank a lot of water. If you're putting something up or even working outdoors where it's really hot, stay hydrated. So at this point, there's really nothing left to do but park the cars. Anyway, thanks for watching. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it, if it was helpful at all to you. Give me a thumbs down if you felt like I was some kind of a maniac who was encouraging you to put yourself in danger. Now I think it's time for a cold one.